Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Welcome to Down with D&D. I am your host, Shawn Merwin, and today our guest host is someone who I have been waiting to talk to. In fact, and now I have the chance. He is the host of The Lounge on the Misdirected Mark Network and the editor of this show, Jesse Edmond, a.k.a. Dr. Palindrome, or Doc Palindrome. Hey, thanks for coming on to talk.
Yes, I'm very excited to be on. Yeah, I have to make sure I have the differentiation between doctor and doc because doc is just what you call a Word document, whereas I am not a doctor. So.
You are not, and if you were, you might be recruited to
right.
to
way
deal
too
with
busy
things.
right now.
Yeah, that's we wouldn't want to be doing that.
Oof, yeah. Well, shout out to any doctors who might actually listen to this.
No kidding.
Thank you.
For sure. So, first of all, for any listeners who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, I've been playing role-playing games for just most of my life. I know that relates to a question you'll ask in a little bit, but I've been doing comedy for a lot of years, semi to actual professionally for about 10 with an improv group. I've done writing, I've done podcasting, all that stuff kind of has kind of coalesced into me working with Misdirected Mark. I found out in my 40s that I am a really good interviewer, and it's one of my favorite things to do, which is way later than I wish I had figured that one out. But yeah, which is why I do The Lounge, which is currently on hiatus. It may have the shortest third season of all time, which was 2 episodes. But we got a lot to do right now, and I'm putting my skills elsewhere. So
cool. So your comedy work is going to come up later in the show because the topic for today's episode is going to be comedy and gaming. But let's focus on the gaming part right now and less on the comedy. So I want to ask, what's your history with gaming, with D&D? When did you start, and what keeps you going?
So like most people, and this isn't everybody, but like most people, my first game ever was Dungeons and Dragons. And that was one game, and it was done poorly, but I was like the little kid that nobody wanted around. Yeah. So they scared me off.
I still am.
Yeah, I feel like I am sometimes too.
Yeah.
So then a couple years after that, for my birthday, which today is also my birthday.
Happy birthday.
When we're recording it. For my birthday, I got Marvel Superheroes by TSR. And that was how I fell in love with role-playing games in general. Part of it was, being able to have a narrative that was in the Marvel universe. But my favorite thing to do wasn't like have people play Spider-Man and fight Dr. Octopus. My favorite thing to do was to have people play their own characters and fight my own bad guys, and then have my bad guys team up with Dr. Octopus as a guest appearance.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the guest star, you know. So that was and that was that level of creativity kind of led me to a bunch of different games. Some of my early games, the original Cyberpunk 2013, the Paranoia, which was
speaking of comedy and gaming.
Yes, exactly. And another one that I played, not as much of, but I just played around with making characters for it so much, and I just enjoyed the idea of it, was a game called Teenagers from Outer Space.
Okay.
Which was it relates a lot to what we're going to be talking about in a little bit.
Sure. So even back then when you were running your superheroes game, was it more serious, or did you delve into comedy even then?
I like to play around in both, and I think I do that when I'm running like a quote unquote serious game. I like to dip my toe into the humorous stuff, and I think sometimes that'll make the serious stuff seem a little bit more serious. I've done my fair share of like grim dark like games that just feel like a slog after a while, and I think it's better to like have somebody goof on stuff. Plus we're humans, so humans have a range of emotions, so if you try to present one, so I think I'm all over the place, and I think my natural style is to make light of things in general, so that kind of works. But yeah, like we mentioned, Paranoia, Teenagers from Outer Space. Also, a game called Tales from the Floating Vagabond, which tried way too hard. Another thing I'll be bringing up in a little bit. Right.
So I assume you are still playing games.
I am. I play lots of different games. I am on the FM Gamers. And right now I'm running Monster of the Week, a variation of that called Five Corners. But we've played some Dungeons and Dragons on there, which is my first really in-depth experience with 5th edition, which I've really enjoyed. I've played pretty much every edition of Dungeons and Dragons. but I've played a lot of stuff, and I think there's a huge birth of the types of games that I've played, and some I enjoy and some I don't.
Right, and so part of that, I enjoy playing things other than D&D every once in a while, just to see what different is out there, but also what grabs my imagination, and what can I bring back into D&D. Not necessarily rules wise, but just the storytelling sort of mechanics that go along with different games.
Yeah,
is what I love. So to switch gears from games to podcasts.
Yeah.
So you have been the host of The Lounge for a few seasons now, and you've interviewed a large number of people in the gaming world. How do you go about preparing to talk to someone about themselves and their role within the RPG community?
So when I first started doing interviews, which was 2013, I set it up where I did a ton of research on somebody, and I had like 15 questions ready to go, and then I started doing that, and it was just I'd get bogged down with things. So what I decided was that less is more in a weird way. Weird theme with me that people that listen to this will find out. But so I'll do some research on somebody. I'll also one of the things I like to pay attention to now is like what have they done on other misdirected mark shows, because if they talked about stuff that if somebody's promoting a game and they've talked about that game on 4 other shows, why not talk to them about something that's not that? Because the lounge specifically is about hanging out and finding out who people are. And that's kind of I'm passionate about who people are, which is why I guess I'm a good interviewer. That's a little insight on me.
There have been times when I've tried to interview someone and I feel like I've done too much research, and I will focus on something. I will do so much research and I'll find something super interesting, or what I feel is super interesting. So I'll kind of focus on that and ask questions about that. But it could be something that they did 10 years ago that they don't care about, or B, even remember doing. So I figured out that doing too much research can lead me as the interviewer down a dark path that the interviewee doesn't want to talk about.
It's absolutely true, and you may key in on one of those things that is specifically of interest to you. I do love to find something that is like some massive thing that somebody did or managed to accomplish that maybe somebody would never ask them about, but they're still interested in talking about. And I find that's a hard thing to find. Like any aspiring interviewers out there, if you've mastered, if you can master that element, like you are going to be just a great interview. I mean, that's what talk shows have full research teams to find that one thing for, John Krasowski or
right.
Krasinski?
Yeah. That John K guy who's married to Emily Blunt. Yeah.
Yeah. That guy.
It's funny because, as you're talking about that, I am seeing, these interview shows on television where they'll find the most embarrassing thing they can to put up on the screen about their interviewee. And it's just, most people take it well, but it's always just that awkward thing of, why did you do that when this person has so much interesting to say? Right. Why are you putting up this embarrassing thing? And it's, it's for comedic reasons, obviously.
Sure.
And but I'm always like, no, I want to hear, how they got to where they are, not their embarrassing third grade picture where they threw up on themselves or something. It just, why?
And at the end of the day, those shows are comedy shows. My show is an interview, getting to know you show. So like the most recent episode, which may be the last episode for a little while, my caveat again, is I have Kimmy Hughes on talking about Decima. But my big question I asked her about was that she cosplayed a character named Big Barda from DC Comics as a DC Bombshells. So these like 40s pinup versions of this characters that DC then made the official version of that character.
Wow.
And I was like, that's a great thing. Yeah. She was really excited to ask about or to talk about that. And, that was such a fun thing to talk about. And, I love finding that stuff.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time when you asked someone or an interview where it was just awkward from start to finish? You don't have to name names, but
I won't. Yeah.
Just has something like that ever happened?
Not since I've been doing the lounge as much. I've had some times where I've had to kind of keep people like a little bit on my side, and then, and adjust for that. And that's a thing that, when you're dealing with neurodiversity in some ways, sometimes you need to make those adjustments. But that's, that's not a big deal at all. But I have had times where people just didn't give me anything. My old podcast, which was just called the Doc Palindrome podcast, I had a couple interviews that were just, I had one that I just never published. It was just a stinker from start to end. And it was like, it ended up being like 15 minutes long. I'm not going to say who he was, but he was a documentarian for a topic that I was super excited to talk about. And it went nowhere. And then like, he was like, yeah, I think I'm done with this. And I'm like, yeah, me too.
Well, at least it was mutual.
Yeah, it was like, this isn't working out. Yeah.
Great. So with that in mind, I thought we would switch over to our main topic for today, which is comedy and gaming.
Comedy and gaming.
Yeah. So for me, comedy is really the hardest form of entertainment to get right. I've tried it with fiction writing. I've tried it in gaming, because trying to add comedy to games for me is always a recipe for disaster for so many reasons. So for you being an expert in the topic and an expert in the realm of games, what is for you the most important element in comedy gaming?
So there's a couple of things, and I'm gonna throw quote unquote rules out there. And I've been trying to do this for a while. I was actually on Misdirected Mark a while back, where I was like, I know there's 3 rules of comedy. I haven't quite figured out what they are yet. So I've been distilling those for the last few years. 2 of them have kind of stayed the same. 1 has not. But before I even get into those rules, I want to talk about what comedy isn't in a weird way. Okay. Because I don't think that this is even a rule. I think it's just like if this is a thing you're going for, then maybe you're not trying to be funny. Maybe you're trying to be something else.
Okay.
And the first one, and I say this all the time, is mean. Mean is never funny. And mean means that somebody is feeling unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
So like we've talked about safety in gaming all over Misdirected Mark.
Right.
I know you guys have talked about it and everything like that.
Sure.
And I think it even goes beyond that to the point where, like, if you have somebody that's playing a character that can't laugh at a certain foible or whatever that character has, then that's mean. That's a line to walk. Sometimes that person will know, like, oh yeah, Grognark is pretty dumb, so let's, we can have a little fun with that.
Right.
But it's not, so mean is a big thing. And then trying to be funny is almost never funny. I used to say trying to be funny is never funny. And then I remembered Robin Williams, and I'm like, yeah, okay, almost never.
Right.
Because,
Right.
some rules are defied.
Yep.
And so if you're like, oh, I'm going to put this stuff in there to be funny, like, silliness sometimes just isn't necessarily funny. It can lead to funny things. But, that's, and when I say silliness, I mean like wackiness. I mean,
Right. Kind of slapstick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The example I always think of is Daffy Duck. If you watch like the original Daffy Duck cartoons, they're not funny because Daffy is just kind of a jerk to whomever he's dealing with. And sometimes it's a hunter. And, I found myself watching those and going, I hope this guy gets this damn duck. But then when Daffy Duck becomes a greedy, selfish character, with his foible being Bugs Bunny, he becomes that's a funnier character.
Okay. Yeah.
Because he's now flawed. He's now kind of broken, and they're not trying to make him as wacky as possible. They're trying to make him a person.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
That's kind of where that comes in.
Yeah. One that I've always heard, and it goes along with mean is never funny, is, don't punch down, punch up. Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're talking about is, right. Don't punch the powerless. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, that's one of those things where sometimes, don't punch down is always going to be there. Again, sometimes people are in on that joke if that's the thing. And that's not, I don't think, punching down. I think that's just, we're going to take this journey together.
Sure.
Yeah. Don't leave anybody behind. That's another way to say it. I don't know. Like I said, I'm still refining this.
No, that's cool. But I like before we get to the 3 rules about what comedy is, defining what comedy isn't, I think is an important thing, because there have been times when I've watched podcasts or watched streams of games, and I just sit there looking at it going, this isn't funny. Of course, I don't like sitcoms. I don't like what most people like, I think, in terms of humor. So I may be a bad person to try to say what's funny and what isn't.
Oh, no, I align with you entirely on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah. So I have lost the train of thought. This train has left the rails. So I am going to now direct us back to your 3 rules of comedy and gaming.
3 rules of comedy and gaming. Okay. So I'm gonna go in reverse order that I put them on the sheet. And I'm gonna start with go small. When you do something little, it will grow. So you take that little ice ball that you roll up all nice and neat, and you roll that down the massive hill, and it'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But you don't have to start it big. You can start it small and then let it grow from there, and then add into it when, oh yeah, you know, one of the examples is from the Five Corners game that I've been running on FM Gamers. The theme of that is that it takes place in a mall that happens to sit at the nexus of all space, time, and reality. Now, I guess that's a pretty heavy concept, but that's all I need to say about it. And right away, and then I'll say, what are stores that are in this mall? And people will say, this one and this one, and you know, and now this mall is populated with all these wacky stores that people took part in, and now there's a character to this mall. But all I had to say was, it's a mall at the center of all space and time. I don't know. That doesn't seem too small, but it's not a lot, right?
Right. It's not that the concept is small; it's that the detail is small.
Yes.
And the detail can grow from that. Yeah. And I think that's actually important in any sort of storytelling, especially storytelling that has any depth to it, is that you start with a detail, and the detail does not have to be big and glaring. But if you create enough of those concrete, specific, noticeable details, then you are building up imagery. You're building up patterns that will then carry you through the story, whether it's drama or comedy or anything. You know, so if you start a novel and the character is playing with a salt shaker at a restaurant, right? And describe the salt shaker and what's in it, what's not in it, how it feels to the character, is the top on or off. You know, that detail can become important later. And I think comedy is very similar in that you start with a detail that's noticeable, then you can play with that detail as the comedy grows.
Yeah.
Is that along the lines of what you're saying?
That's very, yeah, like that's almost exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. Cool.
In fact, to the point where, you know, as you were saying that, I was also saying like sometimes simple is part of that too. Like, you know, yeah, I'll talk about superheroes all the time because I'm a little bit obsessed with them. But like superheroes and supervillains fighting each other isn't funny, but superheroes and supervillains fighting each other being just a common thing in the world, and like now they're punching in together, right. And you know, like making that a familiar thing, you know, adding some simple element to something that is not funny can sometimes make it funny in that way. You know, you've got Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus punching at the same time, and like, oh yeah, how the kids been, you know, okay, and they're gonna fight later, like.
Right.
Oh. That's funny to me. Not immediately so, but there's a joke there that we can get to.
Right, and that's you're setting up the jokes that are going to come down the line, but you need to set it up to make the payoff worth it. Yeah,
and I think one of the other things too is to when the other part of maybe going small is to pull ego back a little bit, and that's a thing I've learned from improv, and it's the hardest skill to master in improv is to let your ego go, because if I'm in a scene with people on stage and we're live and I have a really great joke that I know will be the button line for the scene and it'll end the scene, and then somebody goes in a direction that's taking us away from where I would be going, I have to know to let that go.
Right.
And sometimes, especially if you're the game master for a funny game, sometimes the players are going to come up with something that's way funnier than you could have had to kind of throw that punchline in, let go of what you have.
Yeah. I mean, and that's good advice, not even talking about comedy, but just talking about a GM running a game that's more of a sandbox. You know, you have the direction that you see it going. The players go in a different direction. You have to let that go. So, you know, that's great advice, comedy or just general GMing advice.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because sometimes you'll think the most brilliant thing in the world, but then like you have to know when to pull back. FM Gamers this past week that we played, at one point it looked like the players thought that the band The Who was were the villains behind everything that's been going on. And in my head, I was like, The Who is my favorite band ever. And so I'm like, that's amazing. I would love to have Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey show up and just be evil villains. But then I'm like, I don't know if that's funny. I just couldn't. Couldn't.
I think it's fun. I think that's awesome. You get Townsend with his windmilling and Daltrey spinning his mic. It was damage for those things.
It was interesting because in my head I'm trying to like reconcile oh man, Keith Moon and but then I was like, I don't know, I just couldn't quite do it, especially for a live stream show. But there's a little insight into the FM gamers. The Who were almost the main villains for.
There you go. Well, sounds like my kind of show right there.
But talking about that, and especially talking about like collaborative storytelling, the yes and.
Mm-hmm.
This is an improv thing. Everybody who does improv has heard it. Everybody knows it. When you do improv for a long time, it becomes so tropey that it's sometimes more fun to do the no but you have to do that very in very limited ways. But a yes and will always, adding more stuff will always give more fodder to being funny.
Yeah, and it's I'm trying to reconcile what you're saying about comedy and gaming with just gaming in general.
Yeah,
and yes and has always been something that they've told DMs and GMs to do, but I think we're almost to a point now where yes and can be a detriment to a game, a story, but I think it's a positive to comedy. So I think at some points we might be weighing one against the other there, in terms of, if your game is strictly a comedy game, then definitely go in that direction. If your game is a narrative creation vehicle with comedy elements, you may want to be careful with the yes and. Because now you might be throwing a whole game out of balance by saying, well, sure, you can do X, where X is something completely outside and outrageous of the rules.
Well, and that's one of those things too, where know yourself as a GM. If you want to be in that territory, awesome, that's cool. But if it's going to mean that this carefully planned thing that you had been doing for a long time, or even I'll even throw in there, like if doing a yes and is going to mean that it throws off a plot that you have been hinting at for a while and like you've got all these clues in place, then that's not going to be a good resolution for the players. Like, oh wait, it was just this dumb thing that we guessed but all this other stuff leads to another thing. Although I will say I've run games where I was running a mystery and the players used all the clues to guess something that was totally off of where I was going, and I was like, I like this.
Yeah, this works so much better. Yeah.
So but yeah, use it judiciously. But I mean, yes, and can also, like that ellipse can also lead to we're not going to use that right now.
It could be a yes, and let's get back to that.
Yeah. So
and it's, before we get to the third rule, I kind of wanted, I think this fits with yes and. It's about specifically D&D as a game. Most of the games I've run, and I would include home campaigns and like one-shot game days in public, as well as like organized play and long-term campaigns. Most games that I've run have tried to be serious high fantasy, but ended up being comedy because that's just what the players sort of want.
Yeah.
And not always, it's not like 90% of the time, but 55% of the time, it's and you just as the GM, you just kind of have to say, okay, I'm going to be the straight man, as it were, and I'm going to continue to run this game as if it is a serious fantasy game. But this tutu wearing barbarian and the half orc who fill in the blank with whatever sort of crazy thing a player can come up with. They want comedy, but I can't become them. I have to be the person who sets up the jokes for them. So I'm just going to continue to run this, and we're yes-anding, but the and for me is continuing the story that I have to tell and letting them play off of that. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and I think that's also that kind of goes back to one of those, like, what comedy isn't too. Like you're saying, your ego is like, okay, well then let the players drive, like let them do
right
what they want to do. And I'm going to step back to that a little bit too, because when I say comedy isn't mean, meanness means that the people, the humans, are in on the joke.
Right.
If the players determine that being mean to this NPC is funny, right, and the GM agrees,
right,
then that's fine. Like,
right,
like that's a really fun thing, and that'll happen sometimes.
Sure. Yep.
Especially with villains. So players love to be mean to villains.
Right. Yeah, and villains can often be mean to players.
Yes.
Usually in a more dramatic way rather than a comedic way, but
that's kind of their job. I will say one of the more interesting times where I saw an opportunity for comedy in a game was years ago playing second edition. It was Dark Sun, and there was this big storm, and it separated us from the whole group. It was this pre-published adventure. And then these people came up to us and, like, they gave us food and water, and this guy was like, "Oh, I'll help you. I can heal your wounds and stuff." We're like, "Oh, thank you." And then he's like, all those people turned out to be zombies, and it turns out he poisoned us to get us to work with him. And one of the other players goes, "What? Why would you do that? We were so thankful that you helped us that, like, we would have probably just done what you wanted us to do anyways. We're
right.
adventurers. We go do that sort of thing." And the GM had this moment of, like, feeling bad. Then it was this great moment of, like, all of us just were like, yeah, come on, man. And, like, that just seems really, what a jerk thing to do.
Making the villain feel bad for his actions.
This evil necromancer on
Right.
Dark Sun,
Right.
of all places.
Being shamed into...
just feeling, I could... And for the longest time, we would just joke about him because, like, he could have had friends. Like...
Well, speaking of evil necromancers, your last rule is start with character.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
So that is the one of these rules that is pulled from basically every sitcom writer ever. And it is I think it was originally I find it originally attributed to one of the head writers on the Golden Girls. Okay. And you'll find that, like, with a lot of, and neither of us are huge sitcom people, right? But you'll find with a lot of the best comedy stuff that's out there, it's always going to be character forward. And even when you have a situational comedy, the Golden Girls saying 4 women living in a retirement home in Florida isn't necessarily a funny concept. But when you create those characters and you play with those archetypes, and there's a lot written on how those archetypes fit perfectly into D&D. I won't go into that because I'll misquote some of it. But when you play with those archetypes in that way, that's what makes the humor. And so when players are making characters, just be aware of, what about that if it's if you intend it to be a humorous game, then be aware about what in those characters that they're creating is going to be the most interesting things to play with in that environment.
Right.
And that's rarely going to be like a rules thing.
Right.
You know, if it might be, I don't know. I was almost going to say like, oh, it could be a weakness, but it's almost never going to be on the paper.
Yeah. Well, with 5th edition, they introduced the 4 sort of traits: personality trait, bond, flaw, and I always forget the 4th one. But those are those 4 things that a goal.
Oh, yes.
So those 4 things are non-mechanical.
Yeah.
And they are the perfect time to, when you're sitting down to, say, start a campaign, decide whether it's going to be a comedic campaign and use those traits, flaws, bonds, and goals as your start with character, right? As your comedic grist for the mill.
Yeah, that's a really solid point too, because that's, you know, and you can also gauge like when players pick those, you can gauge the level of humor that they want based on what they're building there. And you'll find a lot of the times that, you know, I think people will try to make those work together. But if you've got a whole party of people that are like, oh, we just want random ones, well, they're in for some yucks.
Yeah. And you know what, you talked about Paranoia, and you know, the most important character in Paranoia is the computer.
Yes.
Right? And so you can even in D&D start with a concept like that. Not that there's this one, you know, maladjusted, malicious overseer of all things, but there sure as heck can be.
Yeah.
Right. There can be that sort of, the setting itself is a character. And if you make that character grim, like Dark Sun or Ravenloft, then you're making that setting. You're making that setting a character of a certain type. You can just as easily make the setting itself a character that will promote humor more than drama.
Yeah, that's very much a thing. And Dungeons and Dragons worlds tend to have characters that can work in that way. I mean, the best example, one that I've actually used, is Elminster.
Right.
One of my favorite things about Elminster, and when I was running a Forgotten Realms campaign, my players automatically just didn't like Elminster. And one of the things I wanted to introduce with him was that the reason he looks like a typical wizard is because he's aware of the fiction of typical wizards.
Oh, nice.
And he's like, no, this is just what people will expect me to look like. So that's, you know, that's why I'm wearing what I'm wearing. But I think they found him, they came upon him and wearing jeans and a t-shirt at one point.
Oh, jeez, that's hilarious.
And they were like, what's he? He's like, just ignore this.
Yeah.
And you know, that's like, you can play with those elements. I mean, sometimes there will be, you know, and that wasn't a comedy campaign by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, that was a chance to throw somebody that was maybe not omnipotent, but you know, pretty major. I'm trying to think of other characters from other campaigns like that. I just don't know them as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've got Strada from Ravenloft, who, you know, it's the most tragic story in gaming, basically, his story of how he fell. But you could definitely, if you wanted to, twist it into a sort of mock horror campaign if you really tried. Someone put up on the DM's Guild Weekend at Strada's, like Weekend at Bernie's, but with Strada. And so, you know, so that sort of thing, if you really lean into it hard, you can make that satire work.
Yeah. I believe it. I believe it. I'm thinking back to the old Ravenloft box sets, and there was a lot of like humor and horror have a lot in common, right? Because both are requiring a quick shock and a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's true. We need a new realm of Ravenloft. That's just the sort of, I'm trying to think of like a cabin in the woods sort of situation. That would be awesome. Okay, new idea. Idea number 7,412. That will never be worked on.
It's interesting too. The reverse works too, because I was like, oh yeah, you could throw clowns in there, but clowns aren't funny anymore. Clowns are terrifying.
Yeah, well, clowns have always been terrifying. Let's be real.
I mean, right, and that's the thing. Like there's such a weird boy that I could probably do a whole podcast series based on like how comedy and horror both intersect with clowns. But yeah. So there's the three rules. Go small, go simple, I think is the better way to say that. The old yes and unless you shouldn't. And then start with character. The player characters are the main characters, but also know when some other characters can kind of come in and have that fun in there. What do you think of those three rules?
Yeah, I like those three rules. My brain really, when I think of rules, the first thing I go to is the don't rather than the do.
Yeah.
So that's why when you started with those, mean is never funny, trying isn't funny, failure is, that sort of thing. That's where my brain always goes when I start thinking of rules. I think of the don't do this first, and here's why, and then what does that leave us for what we should do?
Yeah.
The only extra thing I would add to this whole conversation is I mentioned satire, and satire for me is a very hard comedic form to do well and very easy to do badly.
Yes.
Because for me, satire, I think of somebody like Weird Al. Right? Weird Al gets away with what he can do because he is such a good musician. Right? He's such a good writer. He's such he can play instruments and he sings well enough to pull off what he's trying to do. If I see other people trying to do Weird Al stuff, I usually just shake my head because it doesn't get there for me.
Well, and also, Weird Al is good at being Weird Al because he's Weird Al.
True.
Whereas someone else trying to be Weird Al is never going to be Weird Al.
Right.
And
that's true.
Be yourself really is probably another. You know what? I'm fine. We're 4 rules now. Be yourself.
4 rules. The 3 rules plus 1.
Plus 1.
5 is right out.
And then the warning.
Right.
Beforehand.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that that's an important thing. If you're trying to give comedy to people, and you're trying to be something other than who you are, so I'm going to admit something on the show. We're at 42 minutes, so this will be quick. I've struggled with doing stand-up because before I get up and do stand-up in front of people. And I know I've learned the craft. I know how to build stand-up and everything. But before I do that, I want to know who my character is. The problem with that is I can't know who my stand-up character is until I start doing stand-up.
Right.
So I've trapped myself in a loop, and really I just need to get up and do stand-up and figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch or talk to any comedians, you have to fail so much before you succeed, and it's true with pretty much any craft, right?
Yeah.
You have to do those 10,000 hours, and the first 9,999 are probably not going to be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The advice that noted D&D player Ron Funches gave me was just go do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I will.
Just go do it. And with that, Thank you so much, Doc, for coming on and
course.
talking with us today. I want to thank all of our listeners. I hope you enjoyed this show, as I hope you enjoy all the shows. And thank you for your support. If you would like to support the show, there are many things that you could do to help. You can go to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/MMP. And even for just $1 a month, you can help us pay hosting costs, help edit the show, like Doc so adeptly does. And
As do you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And you can, if you can't afford to give us that $1 or whatever, that's fine. If you could give us a review, tell us how we're doing on whatever medium you listen on, or just talk about the show on social media. Say, hey, I heard a great show today, and give us a little shout out. Point people in our direction. That would be great. Doc, where can people find you on the internet?
So people can find me anywhere you find Doc Palindrome. It is me. I have taken claim on it. I've staked it everywhere. When a new service shows up, I sign up as Doc Palindrome and then forget about it until it becomes popular.
All right. Yep. So all you Facebooky time people can find him anywhere.
Doc Palindrome.
At Doc Palindrome. Sweet.
Instagram, Twitter. Yep.
There you go.
And I've been writing periodically at docpalindrome.com on my website that I let linger for so long. And also, people can find me with Nuts and Bolts Improv. We're actually going to be doing some stuff during this quarantine. So check that out. Best place to find us is on our Facebook page.
Okay, there you go. You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin or on the Down with D&D forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. So, Down with D&D is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, hey, Doc Palindrome, what are we going to do now?
We're going to make some monsters laugh.
Woo! Woo! Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?